Let's get started with a word of prayer. Lord, we just thank you for the day. God, we thank you for the rain that's come. Lord, we thank you for the rain that's coming. But God, please send us some sunshine and some warm days to dry this stuff up. But Lord, most of all, we're here to give you glory and honor and praise. And Lord, I pray that we do that today. I pray that we give you all the praise and all the glory and all the honor that we can. God, I pray today that you'll speak and that you'll speak through me and that we will hear what it is you have, not only through our ears, Lord, but in our heart. Maybe open our hearts, soften them so that we can hear it and understand it and take it and put it there so we can use it every day. Lord knows sometimes when we come to church, Lord, all we hear is it comes in one ear and goes out the other. But Lord, I pray that you'll help it stick. And just bless each and every one here, Lord, and keep us safe as we travel home from here. But God bless this time. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, so here this winter, I've been fooling with a bunch of cows, and we've been just pretty much. It's been feeding cows, and feeding cows, and then feeding cows again, and then feeding cows again, and then feeding cows, and then fixing some fence, and then feeding cows. Right? It's been kind of the winter. It's kind of how it's gone the whole time because the ryegrass was bad, because of all the snow and all the ice and all the stuff. And so I just got to thinking about the other day. I was reading through some Old Testament stuff, so I want you to prepare. I know I've been preaching out of the New Testament a lot here lately, but today we're going to be wholly and solely in the Old Testament. All right? So prepare yourselves. If you don't like the Old Testament, I'm going to tell you something today that will blow your mind. Okay? So all those people that don't like the Old Testament because they don't think it has anything to say, I'm going to prove you wrong today. All right? But anyhow, so it just got me thinking. I was reading the Old Testament, and I got to thinking about what I did, what I've been doing this week. Not that I'm any kind of anything important. I'm just a grunt, right? But a lot of the stuff I was doing kind of reflected of a ranch manager, right? Even though I'm just a grunt, right? But if I got to thinking about it, some of the stuff I was reading about this one fella in the Old Testament was, by golly, this sucker was a ranch manager. He was like the biggest, baddest ranch manager there ever was. And he managed more stuff than anybody in here can even think about. Cattle, rangeland, crops. He did it all. And so I thought, man, this is a pretty cool fella. We might ought to talk about him at church. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about ranch managers, right? So a ranch manager is responsible for what? The entire ranch, right? Because there's lots of ranches out there that are not just cattle. They do row crops, they do deer hunting, they do all kind of stuff. You have to diversify because one year when the cows are bad, calf prices are down, whatever your crops are growing may be good. And when both of those are down, which can happen, then the deer hunting you can kind of jack up, right? Because everybody likes deer hunt, and everybody will pay a gazillion dollars to go out to West Texas and shoot a deer that you called up with feed, right? And that's what some guy was telling me one time. He was a deer guide or whatever, and he said they have to hide really good whenever they go deer hunting on this one ranch. They have to hide really, really good, right? And I said, well, that's kind of normal. I mean, we hide over here. It's not a big. He said, you don't understand. We have to hide so they don't run to us. I was like, wow, you got problems, buddy. But anyway, so ranch manager is over the whole ranch, every aspect of the ranch. He has the decision-making capability. He has the know-how. He has the everything. He is managing the entire ranch from every aspect, no matter how diverse the ranch is. He is the man, right? He is the number 2 man, and the only person that he reports to is the owner, right? So there's the owner, and then there's the ranch manager, and then you got, foremans and hands and so forth. But the ranch manager is like the man, right? He just didn't have enough credit to own the ranch, right? But he runs it, right? But he gets paid for it, so that's pretty good, right? Anyhow, he's responsible for everything, right? The owner says, hey, I want to up my weaning weights. Hey, I want to up my acres, my tons per acre on hay, or I want to do this. I got so much money. Well, he's got to figure out how to make all that happen, right? He's got a budget. He's got to do everything right in order to make it work. So I have down there here he or she. It could be a woman as well. I don't want to put anybody out because of that, because it could be a woman that's pretty handy as a ranch manager. So we'll say she reports directly to the owner. But here's the deal. Not only do they have this awesome job where they get to manage a whole ranch, right? They also have the hard job of making tough decisions when times are tough, right? Everybody knows you get a big cow herd together and all of a sudden you have something breaks out, whether it's pink eye or snotty noses or whatever, and you don't get a handle on that right away, you can lose a bunch of calves. Well, you lose a bunch of calves and that hits the bottom line. They don't make as much or whatever. I mean, there's all kind of things that can happen. You have a drought. You don't have as much, and you got to water more for your crops, and you don't have as much water for your cows to drink. There's all kind of tough situations, right, that you get into. And so ranch managers, they're responsible for all that, right? They have a lot to hold on to. But a lot of times they get themselves in a bind by trying to do all the different things, right? Because there is a lot to do. There's lots of responsibility. But if you guys want to look at Genesis chapter 37, we're going to be Genesis chapter 37 and 39 today. So if you don't know where Genesis is, it's in the first part of the Bible. It's actually the first book of the Bible, or you can look up here. We're going to talk. We're going to talk about one of the premier ranch operations that there ever was. Okay, and you're probably going to laugh when I tell you where it was, but it was in Egypt, right? And the ranch manager, who eventually was the ranch manager, is not right at the first part of the story, but he managed it all. And he was like one of the greatest ranch managers that there ever was, right? And it was like a whole country he was managing, right? And so he was the coolest dude ever. But Joseph didn't start out life that way at all. In fact, he had to go through a bunch of different trials in probably some of the hardest conditions that anybody could ever go through before he got to where he was, right? So you've probably heard of 3 big names in the Bible in the Old Testament. Lots of people have. If you've been to church or you've listened to church on the radio or on TV, you probably recognize Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They Lots of preachers use those three big words, three big names. There's like the three big names in the Bible besides Jesus Christ, right? So after Jacob, right, there's Joseph, right? Joseph was Jacob's son, and along with a bunch of other, he had a bunch of brothers, okay? So Joseph, God gave Joseph these dreams. And so he was a teenager, and as some teenagers like to do, he rubbed it in his brother's face. Brothers, more than one brother, brothers' faces. So Genesis chapter 37, verses 5 through 8 says, one night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. He said, listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundles stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. His brothers responded, so you think you will be king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. This was God getting Joseph ready for what he was going to do. The end, okay? He was kind of showing Joseph where he was going to be in the end. However, there's a big however. He didn't tell him all the steps that he was going to have to take to get there, right? So he saw, I'm going to be king, or I'm going to be some kind of ruler, I'm going to be awesome. However, he didn't take into account a bunch of years that he was going to be low of the low. Okay? I guess God wanted to humble him a little bit, like he does a lot of us. So he didn't know how he was going to get there, didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew that one day he would be some big powerful dude, right? So they hated his brothers. They hated that sucker. And I mean hated him because, you know, he's not the oldest one, so which means he doesn't have really any birthright. He didn't get the blessing. He doesn't, you know, all the things of that time. And so they didn't like him because he was this kid and he was, you know, spouting off about how they were going to worship him and, you know, not worship him, but bow down and you know, they were going to be lowly compared to him. And so, but they didn't know why or what or how or what the situation was going to be and how they were going to be blessed by it. But, so anyway, so they were out in the field. His brothers were all out in the field, and Jacob said, hey, Joseph, I'm gonna gather up some stuff and I'm going to send you out to your brothers to help them. You know, they're out in the pasture looking after the sheep or the goats or, you know, whatever they had. So, but his brothers hated him. Like, if you could imagine hating somebody, you can't imagine hating them much as his brothers hated him, right? They wanted to kill him. They wanted him to die. They did not want him to live anymore because they hated him that much, right? And so, we'll pick up in Genesis chapter 37, verse 28. It says, so when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. So they had already snatched him. They were going to kill him, but then one brother was like, hey, let's not do that, right? His name was Reuben. And so they said, let's throw him in this cistern, which was dry. And then he'll die. And then we didn't actually kill him. He just starved to death or whatever, which is so much better. But anyway, so they threw him in the cistern. Well, then they saw these traders coming, and they were like, we'll sell him into slavery. He'll be gone for good. We won't have to deal with him no more, and we won't have his blood on our hands. Done, right? great idea. Perfect, right? As the brothers were thinking. This was like the best idea ever. So that's what they did. So they snatched him up out of the cistern. They gave him to the traders. They gave him 20 pieces of silver, and they went off to Egypt. And the brothers took his coat and put some goat blood on it and brought it back to Daddy and said, hey, look, I think this is your son's coat. We found it on the way back home. Looks like there's blood all over it. Not sure what's going on, right? So, of course, Jacob thinks he's dead and so on and so forth. But they hated him that much, they wanted to sell him into slavery. They wanted to kill him, but they had a conscience, right? They didn't want that to be on their conscience their whole life. But he was going through rough times. I mean, starting with the whole getting thrown in the cistern. I imagine it wasn't, a couple of feet down. I'm sure it was pretty deep, right? And it probably hurt when he hit the bottom. I mean, I would think so. Anyway, but God's hand was on Joseph, right? He didn't let him die. He didn't let his brother kill him. He got him on a train to Egypt, right? This is where he wanted him to go. But his hand, the times were tough, the times were rough, but God's hand was in it. Even though it might have hurt a little bit, right? Sometimes we go through life and times get tough and it kind of hurts a little bit. But God is with him. God is with us. In chapter, if you flip over 2 chapters to 39, chapter 39, when the traders got to Egypt, of course, they sold him again. He got sold. He got sold again to this big dog guard dude. Okay, and he bought him as a slave, as a slave. And so here we pick up in chapter 39, verse 2. It says, the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. So because Joseph was faithful, and he wasn't, he didn't get to the master's spot and just kind of sat down and moped because he was in slavery now. He didn't do that. Just because he was in a tough spot, he didn't just lay down and die or just lay down and do whatever. Nothing, really, which is what a lot of people do. And he didn't do that. He got to where he was going. Master gave him jobs to do, and he did everything. He did everything with excellence. He did everything. He worked super hard for his master, his Egyptian master. He did everything he was supposed to do and then some. And God blessed everything he did for the master, which blessed the master. And so he was happy as could be, right? He was just thrilled to have this Hebrew guy in his house working, because everything he did, everything that Joseph touched, just, it was blessed. It was great. And so he succeeded with everything. God took care of everything that he needed to do along the way. Right? And so he got to be this big wig in Potiphar was the guy's name, in his house. Potiphar just turned everything he owned over to him and said, you can have anything in this house. Everything, your God is blessing you and is blessing me, so I'm going to give you everything that I got, and you just handle it. So this was his first ranch manager job, okay? He had control over everything in Potiphar's house. And everything he touched succeeded. Everything he did. And all because of his faith. All because he believed. All because he knew that God had a plan for his life, and he was following. He was doing everything that he could do with what he had. Right? That's what we're supposed to do. That's how we're supposed to operate. Right? But then he got comfortable. He got, I'm doing good. I'm where I'm supposed to be. God's blessing. He's showing, you know, all this great stuff's going on. And pow! He got smoked in the back of the head by Potiphar's wife. Look down in verse 19 in chapter 39. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So the wife liked Joseph, and she wanted him, and he knew better, so he ran off. Well, when he ran off, she grabbed his coat and snatched it. Well, then she had his coat. Joseph ran off, and so then she told her husband about her story about what happened. And so he took Joseph and threw him in prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. So Joseph had gotten comfortable where he was at. He was a slave, but yet he was over all of Potiphar's house. He was blessed. God blessed him. And he was just reaping the fruits. I mean, it was just awesome. I mean, he had the life. Until the wife threw a kink in the things. But it was all in God's plan. God had his hand on everything, right? The Potiphar could have had the dude killed right there. I mean, just done. Gone. But he didn't. He put him in prison where the king's prisoners were. Not just regular. It's not talking about regular prison, right? But they put him in prison. It was where the king's prisoners were. And it was, God was moving him. He was using him and moving him to a place where he needed him to be, right? So to put this in a little bit of perspective, when Joseph got sold to the Ishmaelites, the traders, when his brothers sold him into slavery, he was about 17. Okay? So at this point, he's 18 or 19, maybe a little bit older than that. But even though he got sent to prison because of something that he didn't even do, right? It was just the lady was going crazy. He still worked hard, right? The warden gave him jobs to do, and so he did them, and he did them with excellence, and he was hard working. He did everything that he could do to do what God wanted him to do and to be who God wanted him to be. And so, of course, the warden was like, well, this dude works hard. I like him. I'm going to give him other stuff to do, right? And then I'm going to put him in charge of other prisoners. And so, once again, because Joseph was doing what he was supposed to do and he was seeking after God's will, it didn't mean that his life was easy because he was still a slave and he was still in prison, right? That didn't change nothing. And he had gone from something that he was awesome and he was this great person in Potiphar's house to now he was not only a slave, but he was a slave and a prisoner, right? Which was like the bottom, okay? And so he had been in the worst situations, in the worst circumstances, at the worst times. And yet he still trusted that God had a plan for his life. And he still trusted and knew that God was going to get him where he needed him to be. And so he worked as hard as he could to get and to do the things that God wanted him to do. He worked hard at everything so that God would get the glory for it. It was obvious. Potiphar knew that God was on him, was blessing him because he blessed everything that he touched in Potiphar's house. The warden was the same way of the prison. He saw God's hand on Joseph, and he succeeded at everything he did. And so the guard was like, here, take more stuff. You know, everything's going smooth in the prison since you've been here, so we'll give you everything. Right? And so he gathered up. But the deal was that he went through so much stuff, so much bad stuff, even though God's hand was on it and he was moving him to a better place sometimes he had to move him back a couple of notches in order to get him in a place where he needed to be eventually. Joseph was in prison, or either in prison or enslaved, I guess, for 13 years. 13 years. So, when you read this story, you're like, oh, yeah, they sold him into slavery, he went to Potiphar's house, he went to prison, and then voila, right? And we'll get to the voila next week. But it was not that fast, right? This was 13 years of this man's life that was spent in prison or in slavery. 13 years. It wasn't a bam, 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 and then he was this great dude. No. He had a bunch of years that were tough. He had a bunch of years that were rough. Not only, I imagine, feeling like nobody loved him because his own brothers, his own blood had sold him into slavery. I mean, I can't imagine how that feels. If my brother had sold me into slavery, I might have some hard feelings about him. Maybe. I don't think he would have done that, but, at one point in my life, I thought he might have. But that's 13 years is a long time to wait on God to get you where you know that he's supposed to be. So Joseph knew that he was going to be this great dude one day, and what do you imagine he was thinking when he was in the prison? Well, I'm going to get there from here. You know? It's like, I know where I'm supposed to be, but I don't see how where I'm at right now is going to get me where I need to be. But all the things that God had for him, he had a plan, and he was going step by step. And like any good ranch manager, he started out at the bottom. Worked his way up. Working hard. Doing the things that our number one man wants us to do. He was doing all that he could to help and to do what God wanted him to do. He never doubted God or doubted the dreams that God gave him. He knew where he was going to be one day. He just didn't know how he was going to get there. But God showed him step by step. He probably wasn't real happy with the step that sent him to prison, but what can you do? God had him there. And so he knew God had him there because he was living the life he knew he should live, right? He was working hard for Potiphar. He was doing everything, and God was blessing. And he knew that doing crazy stuff with Potiphar's wife was not going to be a smart thing to do and would not be glorifying to God. And so he ran off. Well, when he got in prison, he knew that this is God's doing. God's got me going to prison for something, even though nobody really likes to go to prison. But the other option there was doing things that was not right, that he knew would be a sin, with Potiphar's wife. And so he chose correctly. God had a plan for him. He sent him to prison. He never doubted where he would be. He never doubted where he would be. So the question I have today is, where are you at? Where are you at? And when times get tough, even when it's 13 years tough, where's your faith? Where are you? Is it still strong? Are you still working as hard as you can to give God glory in everything that you do? Or you just roll over and give up? Because that's the easy thing, right? It's the easy thing for us to do is to just give up and say, oh, well, I guess I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or when times get tough. Here's the other question I want you to answer, and you don't tell me, just answer it yourself, right? When times get tough, when you get in a bind, even though you're doing right, are you still praising God and giving Him glory? Because when times are tough, it's tough to do that. It's tough to turn around and say, God, I want to give you glory, and I want to praise your name for having me where I'm at. Because I know you got something for me, and I just hadn't got there yet. It's tough. It's tough to do, but Joseph here shows us that God blesses. God blesses us. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a pile of money. I mean, if it was, it'd be great, right? But that's not necessarily the case. Joseph here was blessed with a great opportunity to save his people. And like I said, we'll get to that next week. But when times are tough, are you still praising God and giving Him glory because of where He's got you and what you can learn from it? Because He's got you there for a reason, even though sometimes it's hard to see. I'm sure Joseph didn't know why he was going to prison, but he knew that he was going there because God had him there. Because he was doing all that he could do for God, and he knew that. What are you doing for God on a daily basis? How are you giving Him praise and honor and glory through your life? Because when you do that, that's when you're going to know that God has you where He has you for a purpose. We all have a purpose. God has a plan for us. He doesn't give us the steps, okay? He's not going to say, all right, today you're going to do this, next week you're going to do this, and next month you're going to do this. That would be great, right? For those of us that like to plan. I like to know what's going on. He doesn't do that. He asks us to trust, and He asks us to give Him all of us. So how much of you are you giving to Him? How much? 10%? 20%? 30%? It's getting on up there. Maybe 50%. It's pretty tough to give 50% of you. He doesn't say, I want 50%. He wants all of us. All of us. So that everything that we do points to Him. Not for me. I don't stand up here to do this for me. Everything we do needs to point to God. Period. Let's pray. Lord, we come to You now, and we just thank You for Your Word. The fact that Your Word is history and that it is truth. And it's undeniable, Lord, that these things happen. God, I thank You for this story about Joseph and about his brothers and about all that's going on in his life, and the fact that, times do get tough for everybody. And Lord, Joseph just looked to You for everything. And Lord, I pray that we will learn to do that. That our faith will be strong enough to give You praise even when times are tough. Because, Lord, it's hard. It's hard to give us all of ourselves to You. We feel like we have to go so many different ways and divide ourselves up in so many different ways for kids and family and work and then You. And God, I pray that we restructure that. Pray that we will give ourselves to You first and allow everything else to fall in. Lord, guide us in that. Burden our hearts with that. Show us how to live. In Your name I pray. Amen.